Welcome, everybody. Well, we're in the, as they say in the racing world, in the final straight. Session number 5. We're going to finish off this series at the end of this evening. And then we'll have a surprise for the next occasion. We have now moved to a place where we're talking about love in context of reciprocity. Reciprocity is an interesting idea. The idea being that things are reciprocal to each other like a mirror image. And the concept here that the Alter Rebbe raises in this chapter is that we are very powerful in terms of evoking love from another. So thus far we spoke about the love flow from within, and now we're moving into how we extend ourselves to actually evoke the love in another. The Alter Rebbe mentions a quote from Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs by Solomon, King Shlomo HaMelech. Over and over again, you have it some dozens of times scattered throughout the 5 volumes of Sefer Tanya. And the quote roughly in English is, just as our face is reflected in water, so do we reflect each other. And although it's a proverb and a fine statement, there's something absolutely true about it. If we were to be accurate with the translation is, as a face is reflected in water, so should we, not it happens, but so should we reflect each other's love. Now, the interesting thing is that Mishlei is a work that teaches, so it's telling us aspects also of should and should not, because it's talking about what is correct and what might not be correct. Hasidism takes this translation and removes the word should and says does. Of course, not to change the translation, but adds a further level of understanding. What's the difference? It's telling us not that that's what should be the case, but that's what is the case. When we use the right kavanah, when we're able to allow ourselves to get right into the correct frame of mind and heart, to be able to be authentic in the way that we share love with another, this does automatically awaken it, says Chassidus. Let's understand. The word chassid, what's Chassidism? A lot of people ask me, what is Chassidism? How does it differ from Kabbalah? Is Kabbalah and Chassidism the same thing? Can I ask a favor? Could you just close this door for me? It's just the sounds from the other room. You can edit that out, Menachem. What is a chassid? When Jewish peoplehood were living in great economic and social deprivation in the European period, we're talking from 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries and the like, there was a very great sense of depression. And we're talking about a long period, centuries. Of course, there were periods when there was a golden period earlier on in Spain. Even with Islam, there was a golden period where there was mutuality. With Sufism, there was a golden period as well. But then there were several centuries that were really, really very, very belittling of Jewish peoplehood. And the kind of social depression caused people to feel a lack of hope. They kept authenticity in terms of the Torah. They adhered to it, but with a heavy heart. And you'll find that a lot of the teaching and methodology of teaching of those centuries was highly legalistic. In other words, it was about the shoulds and shouldn'ts and the niceties of the argumentation. It was more in terms of the factuality of the subject matter, almost as an escapism. The Baal Shem Tov introduced a dimension into that same learning which allowed the heart to soar, to lend hope and aspiration. The Baal Shem Tov brought an emotional quality into the act of learning which allowed the people to be lifted up. And then there was another aspect. There was a schism within our Jewish community. There was division. There was a division between the elite, those who could afford to sit and learn, which were the small minority, and the majority who were artisans, people who had to make a living. They were eked out a living, whether they were the middlemen in business, which often we were reduced to, or they had some menial tasks and jobs. And therefore they felt very inadequate. The Baal Shem Tov said two things. He emphasized the phrase, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. You should serve Hashem with joy, uplift. And then he said something which is highly controversial. He said that every single person possesses an equal connection to the source. Now, you and I take that for granted. That sounds like highly democratic and very appropriate. Not for the day. In the day, those who had the opportunity to be able to sit and study, they were the ones who were perceived to be closer to God because they knew the Torah better, and the poor individual who couldn't was more distant. And here comes a revolutionary, and he says, no, the shoemaker is as close as the tzaddik of the highest order. This upset the elite Jewish leadership, and therefore that was one of the reasons that there arose an opposition within the learned quarters, especially within Lithuania. And the opponents became known as the mitnagdim, or misnagdim, as it's colloquially pronounced, the opponents. That unfortunately led to repercussions which were quite unfortunate, which we'll come to and discuss. But there's another dimension of the word Hasidism. What is derived from? The word that we've been studying, chesed. Chesed means the contribution outwardly. The capacity to be able to, there's a sheet on the table, Chaim.
Sorry.
That's fine. The capacity to be able to share of oneself beyond the letter of the law, Mishuras Hadin. And that's what Hasidim were known for. You don't just do the minimum required to conform, but you go beyond the letter of the law and do it in a much more magnanimous manner. So if you do a mitzvah, you don't just do the mitzvah at the minimalist level, which means I do it and now I feel good I've done it, but you actually emotionally involve yourself so you adorn the mitzvah. Many examples of that. I mean, I could give tzedakah, I can give charity, and I could say to myself, well, I'll give $5 to this person who's knocking at the door. But then I say to myself, I'm a chassid. Okay, if I give everyone $5, maybe I won't have enough $5, but nevertheless, I'm going to give $10 because I want to make the mitzvah that much more beautiful. That's just a simplistic example. Buying a pair of tefillin. You can buy a pair of tefillin for $500-600 and it's completely kosher, and you can buy tefillin for $1,500 and more because the scribe is a more senior scribe who takes more care and beautifies the inside of it in a much more adorning manner. It's a question of feeling. The word chassid means to practice chesed beyond the letter of the law. And that's what we were been talking about. When love flows, the love should flow in a way of chesed, which characterizes Hasidus. When it does flow like that, then you automatically evoke from the other a reciprocal feeling. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says by quoting here from Mishlei. Not as a face is reflected in water, should we reflect each other, but as a face is reflected in water, do we automatically reciprocate it? It's automatic, but it has to come from a place within which is truly authentic. And that's what Hasidus tries to do, the authenticity. That's one dimension of it. The other dimension is, it takes, of course, the deeper teachings of Kabbalah and makes them practical, applicable, as we're doing around the table here, in order to be able to create not just the theoretical construct, but the actual behavior of it. So that's the first part of our discussion here. To be a person who evokes reciprocity requires an authentic flow of an appropriate or proper kavana. You know when a person is saying it for real or they're just saying it. Children are best at interpreting that. They're able to look at your eyes and the face and be able to straight away tell, where is it coming from? Is it coming from here or is it coming from here? So do we, automatically, as we're going to see. A very good example of this was a wonderful historical precedent. Well, it wasn't so wonderful for the person involved, who was the Alter Rebbe. He was imprisoned in the famous prison in Russia in Petersburg, St. Petersburg. What's the modern name for St. Petersburg? Is it Dnipropetrovsk?
Oh.
What is it?
It's St. Petersburg again.
It's back there, but what was it for a long time? Where are our
Leningrad.
Leningrad, okay. So he was in prison there, and what was the situation? Jewish people colluded with the authorities to have him thrown into prison. That's how it was. Why? They were the opponents of Hasidim. So they said that he was sending money to the enemy of the Russians, to the Holy Land. Who was in charge of the Holy Land? Turkey. Who was Turkey the arch enemy of? Russia. And therefore, because he was sending money to the Holy Land, there was a whole libel that was that arose, and he was actually brought and taken to prison and put on trial, interrogated, tortured, what have you. He was released after his ordeal. He was found actually to be innocent. Upon leaving, the first epistle, which everything was taught there in a format of sending out what they called epistles. What was an epistle? Epistle is a form of written word that formulates a piece of teaching and is sent to a second party. In it he says as follows: I don't want you to lift your finger, lift your voice against anyone who might have caused this. Quite the contrary. What I want you to do is practice Ahavat Yisrael, love of one's fellow Jew, and do so more so than before. And then he says, and I take it upon myself to tell you that as a consequence of that, you'll create reciprocal love. Now, of course, that takes quite a lot after having undergone the kind of treatment that he did undergo. But there have been unfortunate periods in Jewish history when Jew has turned against Jew. I mean, even in our living history, unfortunately, or perhaps just earlier than the times of us around the table, but in 1946, 1947, we had within our own underground defense forces fighting for Israel, real competitive spirit, if you want to put it, between, say, the Haganah and the Irgun. And it was so politicized that at one stage the Haganah actually fired and killed Jews on the Irgun ship bringing arms to Israel because they didn't want the Irgun to get the arms. It was terrible episodes that are in our own current living history. And this is the kind of thing we need to contradict. And how do we contradict it? By being authentic within ourselves. If we're able to evoke from ourselves that authenticity of true love, then under those circumstances, you'd completely eradicate the possibility of causeless hatred. How do you get rid of causeless hatred? Causeless love. Love someone despite themselves. As we said in previous weeks, what do you love? You love that which is true in the person, their soul, their neshama. What you dislike about the person may be their behavior, but you still love the person. It happens almost naturally. Don't you find that when you're speaking to somebody and they're talking to you, don't you find that you adopt the facial intonation, the body stance of the person who's sharing with you? If someone is saying, God forbid, something bad about themselves, that they're suffering, or what have you, you tend to scrunch your own face up also at the same time. Why is that happening? You'll say that because you're empathizing, but you're doing it automatically. You don't do it deliberately. If I took photos, you'd be surprised that sometimes the way your face looks and your body behavior looks when you are actually listening to a second person. It's because automatically they're evoking this within you. Therefore, if you actually are conscious and mindful of what you say, you evoke something in another person. If it's positive, you evoke the positivity that's latent in the other person. So it's really very, very important to be true to one's heart. So although we've spoken about aspects of different phases of love, I guess what we're talking about today is the truth of loving. And I know for many people it's a problematic arena because how often do people say, I don't know what love is. And it's because they haven't had the opportunity to feel that reciprocity from someone who truly loves them. To be truly loved allows you to experience within you their love and evoke within you your potential to love. So terribly important. Having said that, we can add to that and say, when the love is, in a way, between parties of unequal status, and here I'm not trying to speak again about elitism in other words, but let's take examples. Even in our, in the kind of common news that we read about, a millionaire falls in love with a pauper, okay? Stories. The king falls in love with a commoner. Well, that happened also not that terribly long ago in royal House of England when King Edward had to abdicate before the Second World War, you recall, and because of his love for Mary Simpson, an American who was not of royal blood. Say again?
Marian.
Who's that?
The Danish.
Oh, the Danish. Yeah. I don't think they have such hang-ups as the English crown seem to have. When someone is, in her case she was a divorcee, and that was a big issue for the church as well. I agree, there was other overtones. When someone who's extremely bright falls in love with someone who's considered relatively simple. I'm not sure if she was, but Marilyn Monroe was married to the great playwright Arthur Miller. Okay, someone said Arthur Miller and the dumb blonde. Okay, I don't know if she was a dumb blonde or not. I mean, far from me to say. But it evokes these contrasts, evoke tremendous interest on people's part because it's unusual. Or if someone chooses to marry someone who is deformed. Last week I had a call from a certain individual who told me that their son is marrying a thalidomide baby without arms, a woman. She was rather distressed how that kind of marriage would function, etc. But when you're talking in terms of these stark contrasts, the author of the Tanya says, there you can see reciprocity to the highest degree. Meaning that when someone is, so to speak, an underdog and feels the love of someone whom they might have thought, I don't deserve their love. I don't know, people might think in those ways. I don't deserve their love. Then the sensitivity to the love that's showered on you is even much more profound, much more pronounced. And maybe that's what causes us to have a sense of voyeurism when we read about these things and we think about how could that be? What really is it? Because love transcends boundaries. Why is the Alter Rebbe talking about these things? Because the Alter Rebbe says, what is the true parallel that he wants to bring out? He tries to bring out the parallel of God and his people. God, the infinite, chooses the Jewish people to carry out the Torah. Sure, he chooses other people for other tasks, but here we're talking in our context. Hence we've been called the chosen people. Now, chosenness doesn't mean necessarily superiority. A lot of people mistake that. That's a way that perhaps the church has propagated it in a way that it can become offensive or arouse the ire of the masses. But to be chosen means to be chosen for a task. If I choose an architect to carry out the architectural job for my new house, and then I choose an engineer, and then I choose an interior designer, is one going to argue with the other that I am better than you? I have been chosen by him to be the architect, and an architect is much superior to an engineer. Of course, that's ridiculous. Chosenness means chosen for a purpose, for a task. And that's exactly right. For us, Our task is a rather onerous task. The Torah is a very onerous task. I think anyone here would recognize that if you were to keep everything 100%, and I certainly can't claim to do so either, that is an onerous task. We've been chosen to carry out the task of Torah. Okay? So that's the element of chosen. So the infinite God chooses a very human grouping of people, a people who is a slave nation, who are the lowest class in Egyptian society, the ones who remove the garbage from the homes of the Egyptians. And this is the people that are chosen in order to become the people of the Torah. So the Alter Rebbe says, how can we fail but to feel such a degree of love that we reciprocate back? God loves us to that extent, we reciprocate it. So we find it amongst ourselves also. So there's this element that the Alter Rebbe says, you can take these contrasts that you find in ordinary human life circumstances, the contrasting circumstances that I enunciated, and apply that equally in terms of our relationship to Hashem. And when we dwell on that, when we consider that, when we think, me, the me human, mortal human being, and I have entered into a relationship with the infinite which is personal, then how can I not but reciprocate that love? That's the way the Alter Rebbe explains the use of these parallels. Then there's another notion which also relates to this idea of reciprocity, and that is soulmates, or soul brotherhood. How often do I find people asking the question, how will I find my soulmate? Or is that person my soulmate? Well, the truth of the matter is that there's no literal truth to the meaning soulmate. It's a nice turn of phrase. But the idea that, even the way that the Torah sometimes puts it, that when two people marry, it's two halves of a soul coming together. But that's still a prose-like allegorical way of speaking of the closeness. But when we talk about soul brotherhood and soul mateship, what we're really talking about is the fact that there is that reciprocity. And that's what we mean by that term. Because when a person, if two people enter into a pact, right? Everyone studied Huckleberry Finn at some stage, or Tom Sawyer at some stage in literature, in school and the like, and they then decide they'll prick their blood of their finger and they'll put their fingers together, and now they've become soul brothers for life as a result of the mixing of the blood, right? Okay. Then you go out of your way for the next person. There's a relationship there that's so reciprocal that you almost are able to read the other one's mind and heart. That's what real soul mateship is all about. We express that in a way every time we make a bracha, every time we make a blessing. What's the formula for many blessings? It goes on and says, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav. Translation. Look at the English, the Old English, who sanctified us with his commandments. Haven't got the faintest idea what that means, do you? So let's analyze it in its literal way. Kiddushanu, what's the word kiddushanu? It comes from the word kadosh. What does the word kadosh mean? Holy. But again, the word holy is a very antiquated old word. I'm not quite sure. However, in literal Hebrew, it also means separate. Separate, something other than me. Kiddushanu. So what did Hashem do? Why do we say this formula, which Hashem made us separate? Doesn't make any sense when we say that. And yet, it makes all the sense in the world, because what it means is also something more profound. What other word derives from Kiddushanu? The word Kiddushin. Close. Kiddushin. What's Kiddushin? Marriage. Marriage. The word Kiddushin is a marriage. You'll find it that the rabbi under the chuppah enunciates the formula for Kiddushin. What does it mean, marriage? So here we've got separateness, we've got marriage, we're throwing out very, very basic building blocks of what the concept is, and we're trying to bring it together. What's the notion of kiddushin and marriage? How does this apply in terms of reciprocity? That's obvious. When you actually create a state of kiddushin, you create the public statement as well as the private legitimacy of true reciprocity. That can only happen from a state of separateness. We say that, as I said to you last week, each person maintains their distinctive individuality in a relationship. And that distinctive individuality, the differentness, the separateness, is the prerequisite to love. You can only have reciprocity when there's differentness. When it's sameness, it's unity. It's not reciprocity. Reciprocity means something that's different relating to something that's different, but relating in a like manner. That's much harder. If we have two people who are identical, clones, and we feel and we recognize that they think alike and they speak alike and they do alike and they look alike, of course, they're clones. Let's take one step removed from that. Twins, identical twins. Identical twins, looking alike, behaving alike, thinking alike, understandable. What is less understandable is when two people, each from completely different life circumstances, raised in different households, come together and spend a lifetime each evoking the love from the other, notwithstanding that they're two quite different parties. Now that's something. And that's what we're saying. Kiddushin, from a state of separateness, we have that sense of soul mateship. And that's why the word kadosh becomes the antiquated holy. What does holy mean? Holy means separate. It's something removed from the ordinary. And this is removed from the ordinary every single day when two people live together and try to allow each other's lives to be enhanced through that process of living together. What they're doing is expressing the word kiddushanu, which is absolutely the translation that we said earlier. Then there's another factor of reciprocity, and it works like this. We've all experienced love. We've experienced love through our parents. We've experienced love through our spouses. We might have experienced love through our children, through cousins, through friendship, very profoundly. We've all experienced aspects of love. When you are in love, in that moment of true loving, what happens to our emotions?
Free.
Free?
You're elated.
Elated? It's elevating. Do you feel lighter? Often people say, I feel lighter in that moment. Everything's lighter. Colours are lighter. The world feels alight. The orange of the autumn leaves suddenly are bright yellow orange, not just a yellow orange. You know, when a person is truly experiencing the state of love, there is an elevating process, which is the same kind of feeling that is expressed again by the mystics when they speak in terms of entering into a state of oneness with the all. It's just such a totally elevating experience. So another aspect is that you and I have the capacity to lift each other up. And that's a wondrous capacity. There's nothing more beautiful than feeling elated, because it alters the whole perception of reality, as you will understand and know. And therefore, that's another aspect of reciprocity. You have the capacity to lift someone else up, and they have the capacity to lift you up in the very same way. And this process can take place across the board. What happens when it doesn't take place? What happens when, God forbid, I hurt someone? It's really interesting to note that who are the people that we tend to hurt most? Those who are closest to us, which is obviously anomalous. I mean, I can understand hurting someone who I don't care so much about, but why do I hurt the people who are closest to me? Why does she said that and I take umbrage, right? Ego man, wife has to serve husband. No longer, we're emancipated. But simple words start to affect a man much more so than a woman. Whereas the man's behavior, he comes home, and what does he do? He goes straight to the computer, not to me. Happens often. What's going on? Why is there a greater sense of aggrievement under those circumstances?
Because you expect more from your loved one.
You expect more, but maybe we should argue that we should never have any expectations. I'm just moving the discussion forward in that direction. Why should you, if you're an enlightened spiritual individual who is not ego-centered and doesn't have that sense of I expect, but the pain is still there, why would the pain be there from closer ones rather than the distant ones? That's my question. When a person is close to us and we love that person, the slightest departure from the norm registers much more loudly. If someone else would say that, I don't care. She said that, oh, I care. Because when you are in this beautiful tension of love from a position of differentness, the proximity and the closeness evokes reciprocity so powerfully that the slightest departure from what would be considered the norm of loving hurts much more. Of course we're hurt much more by those that we are closer in love with. Now it becomes completely understandable. So under those circumstances, it requires a greater mastery when we are with our loved ones, when we're in our own home domain. That's when we have to start practice the mastery of love with those that we would otherwise take for granted, because they're the ones that are truly in love with us. So it's another aspect we have to be very, very aware of. But having said that, does it matter if the person who offends is a master, a tzaddik, or someone who is an illiterate? Does it hurt you any less if the person who loves you is of lower status? Of course not. If you are loved and you love someone, it doesn't matter. Here the Alter Rebbe extends it again to the idea of the heights of God-man relationship, God-woman relationship. If a tzaddik offends against God, God is as pained as when the illiterate offends against God. No more, no less. And under those circumstances, likewise between us. If we can adopt that posture between us, I don't know you very well. Some of you I know better than others. Does that mean that I take liberties with some of you rather than others? Does it mean I should love someone less than the person that I know less and no more? So the answer is no. Ahavat Yisrael means the sense of love that we need to evoke from ourselves for every single person. Possible?
Nothing's impossible.
Nothing's impossible. But in your situational setting of life, work, home, all right, here's the homework. The homework is, during this week, take someone that you really don't have particularly warm feelings for and learn to love them appropriately. That's the test. It really is the test. Okay. Tell me, how long should one person love another person?
That's the question, maybe.
Let's think about that. Today, 5 years is a long time in a marriage, no? Okay. 10 years, wow, they really made it. All right? So my wife and I are now married 41 years. So we've gone a bit further, okay? Not today, that's not the anniversary. I'm just giving an example, all right? It is very common in our day and age to speak about love waning. Diminishing. That's not love. Love doesn't wane if it's true. Sure, you can be hurt to that extent, and that's why you are hurt, because the love is strong. You can only be hurt when love is strong, but you can feel the pain so much that you don't want to continue in the relationship. That I understand. But if you play your cards right, the love doesn't wane. It doesn't wane after 2 years, after 5 years, after 7 years. But at different phases of life, you become more sophisticated to be able to arouse within you that love that's ideal. A couple comes to a rabbi and says, we want a divorce. Why? We don't feel so strongly for each other anymore. Whatever the reasons are. The rabbi says, okay, I'll carry out the divorce, but I want you to do something first. What I want you to do first is to have the reception all over again. Right? They've been married 20 years. I want you to have the reception all over again. What do you mean, Rabbi? I want you to invite exactly the same people. I want you to dress in exactly the same clothes. I want you to have as similar makeup as you had then. Everything. Replicated. After that, I'll give you the divorce. Okay? Seems like they're well-to-do people. They'll have a party. They'll have another reception. Fine. All right, a bit of dieting. It gets back into the dress, into the suit, what have you. Takes place. What takes place, in fact? He and she fall in love again. There was a moment of truth back then. They forgot. They forgot something that was true within them. And if you're able to set up the same setting when the height of the loving experience took place, then you can reawaken it if it's true. And therefore, we have to remember constantly what it is that we are loving. Two people that truly love each other should every day consider, contemplate, think deeply about the quality and nature of their love. And then it evokes again and evokes it in the other, and it becomes cyclic and it continues onwards. We forget about that. We forget to think about the next person. We forget to contemplate the beauty of the next person. We don't allow ourselves that time of the day. We're too busy, and the most important things in life escape us and pass us by for the most frivolous of reasons. Work, income, hobby, whatever it might be the case. Very, very important. How does the Alter Rebbe relate that back? He says, let's think of another moment when this took place. Well, there was a marriage that took place between the Jewish people and God, right? It was the marriage at Har Sinai. That was considered a marriage. We were the bride and God was the bridegroom. What are we told to remember on a daily basis? Exodus. Every day we're told we have to remember the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus. Why? Because the Exodus from Egypt was the process of the bridegroom and the bride being led to the chuppah. It was a lengthy journey, but there was a red carpet, it was made out of sand, it was a different color, and we had some trials and tribulations, we lost our way a few times, etc. It was rather circuitous journey and what have you. Nevertheless, that's what it is. And every day we have to remember, we have to relive the chuppah. And that we do in the Shema. In the Shema, there's always the phraseology about remembering the time when we left Mitzrayim. Because there we allow ourselves, if you contemplate deeply the whole process of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, through to the betrothal and the Kiddushin at Har Sinai, then you're doing exactly what the rabbi asked that couple before their request of divorce would be effected. And that's what we need to do. Do we think enough about our loved ones? Do we relive that moment sufficiently in order to allow that to take place?
Question?
Yes.
So is there a difference between falling in love and choosing to be in love with someone?
Well, in English there is it's a very unfortunate turn of phrase, isn't it? To fall in love, like it's a bad mistake, I fell. It's
And then fall out.
yeah, and then or you have the fallout from the marriage, whatever it might be. It's really, I've often wondered, how did that ever come into the lexicon, to fall in love?
Well, I think one implies choosing someone, another one is it's being chosen for you and you just act accordingly.
Okay, it may well be that you're correct. I haven't thought myself very deeply about it, except that it always struck me that I don't know if that's true in any other language. Does anyone know any other language where it's falling in love is natural to that language?
No.
No. Okay, that's all we can say about English marriages then. All right. But the truth of the matter is that you've really raised a very good point. What is the difference between romance and love? Is romance an aspect of love? Is love an ingredient in romance? How do the two interrelate? You don't find the word romance in Hebrew, by the way. I couldn't find it. Someone can correct me. It's a curious expression that derives from the classical languages. What is romance?
It's a playing of emotion to win someone's affection.
Okay, romance is a process. Okay, is romance a process rather than a thing? Okay.
It's more temporary.
Romance is a phase, an aspect that's,
Means to an end.
it's a means to an end, but to do with feelings. Would you say the feelings are the primary ingredient of romance? No?
Yeah, it has to be.
It can just be to impress.
Romance is the more outward.
Then it stops from the heart.
It's external, okay? In other words, if you don't have the flowers at the doorstep, that's not romantic.
But they say that animals do it too.
They have their own, well, we may not be able to get into, let's keep animals out of it at the moment because we're not quite sure what's going on in their hearts and minds. But let's stick with ourselves. We're already fairly complex as it is.
So they're little ceremonies or rituals. They're not.
Rituals,
Is romance like a spell that you fall under?
is it a spell that you fall under? Romeo and Juliet.
It's not a prerequisite for love.
It's not a prerequisite for love. Okay.
Depends on
It may well be that we're using the word romance as a statement of external manifestation, okay? I tend to agree with the person who said it tends to be externally manifested as such. And romance, as you said, is a phase. It passes, unfortunately, but it passes, which means it's not true. Within romance, there must be the truth of love in order for it to endure. Romance itself will not endure, because that's the external trappings of feelings, but still externalized feelings. But the truth of inner feelings,
You can't evoke it, this romantic feeling.
sure you can evoke romantic feeling, but it's sometimes very difficult to do so as you move to a more profound love. And suddenly the externality of love seems almost trivial in comparison to it as you evolve to something deeper and deeper and deeper. So after 10 years, it's much deeper. I always say that you really learn to love someone at least 5 to 7 years after you marry. Till then, it's not really yet love. You haven't matured into the depth of love. There was something true in the beginning, there's no question. But for that truth to grow, to be like a plant that's watered through through life in order for it to evolve and develop, and then you have the maturity of the tree. You have the maturity of the love at that point. And then it continues on and deepens and deepens and deepens. In our society today, we're looking very much at the external trappings because that's how the media portrays it, because that's the most dramatic thing that you can show on a screen. When you show things dramatically on the screen, so everyone believes that's what it has to be for 40 years of life. But it's not true. The truth is it should deepen, not it should wane. And that's a very important feature of it. Likewise, our relationship with the All, with Hashem, with creation. As we grow, our relationship of love must continuously deepen. We can say that Exodus was romance. It was dramatic. There was all sorts of external trappings. We had all these wonderful miracles occurring, 10 of them, and all the wondrousness that lifted us up and elated us, and we're at our height at Har Sinai. And then came the hard work of maintenance, the Yitzchak aspect that we spoke last time. The capacity to be able to mature in our loving repose. But let's go back to the beginning, what we're trying to say here, that we are powerful. So you know what? I often tell people to look at themselves in the mirror and speak to themselves. You know how few of us actually ever observe our facial features as we speak? And sometimes I tell people to choose 7 different subjects to speak 7 days of the week. And sometimes it might be a hurtful subject, sometimes it'll be a beautiful subject, sometimes it may be something quite other. And when you see your body language, when you see yourself talking about it, then you start recognizing it in others. And as you recognize in others, it doesn't become just an automatic, symbiotic relationship of my behavior mimics the other one, but you begin to understand in depth what's taking place, and what happens from you isn't just external mimicking of behavior automatically, but it comes something much more profound, something much more real. And that's the message that I want to convey to you. Each one of us has the capacity to evoke the love of our loved ones, and those that are not so loved. And I really do want you to walk away from this series, not just understanding the different aspects of love that the Alter Rebbe is sharing with us, but our capacity to allow that to become part of the reality of the world. Here we are, 20, 30 people around a table. If 20, 30 people as a base go out there and start practicing it, it goes in geometric progression and radiates outwards and outwards. Don't feel like you're a single digit unable to change the nature of the world. Every single person is an olam katan, a microcosm of the macrocosmos. And each one of us, therefore, have the capacity to affect the world. Any questions or thoughts?
It's like what Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. So
be the change that you wish to see in the world. Yes.
You don't expect other people to change.
Yep.
You change, and then according to this...
No question. I think Mahatma Gandhi was a great student of the Torah. Yes, sure.
And I apologise if it's something you've covered before.
We've covered it before. No, go on.
In the homework that you have set in order to be loving and reciprocate and evoke, or I don't know if evoke is the right word, to endeavour to be the positive love. If it is, and I'm not saying if as a condition, but the recipient of that, with all your good intentions, if that person is not interested in your love and is blocking that love, your statement is in order to heal them?
You have to do what you have to do. Everyone exercises free choice. If your capacity to love someone else doesn't evoke that love, may not evoke it in 2 days, may not evoke it in 2 weeks, may not evoke it in 2 years, you also have the choice in terms of your capacity to be able to stay in that relationship and continue the process. And there's no hard and fast rules. In a previous generation, they would have stayed a whole lifetime notwithstanding. In this generation, it's less tolerable to do that, but it's a personal choice, and you can't compare two people in that respect. So I can't give you any definitive answer in terms of what's right and what's wrong. You do what's within your capacities, but if the other person chooses otherwise, you also have free choice and how to respond to that.
But my question really is, I'm benefiting by trying to be that person who is reciprocating and giving the positive. If it's not reciprocated and I'm still trying to give it, even at a time when it's not being received, it's to my benefit also, no?
Absolutely, because you're masterfully practicing what is natural to you. But there comes, because we are human beings and time does take its toll, if there results a situation of painfulness because that reciprocation is not taking place, you are eligible to make your own life decisions. Well, I certainly hope that our 5 sessions have been useful. I can tell you, for me, it was extremely useful. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once told me in a private audience, I may have shared this before, but he said that when I told him that I was having difficulty accumulating sufficient knowledge to be a teacher, so he said to me, if you teach something, if you study something in order to teach it, then you will learn it 1,000 times as much. And then the Rebbe added, and this is not an exaggeration. Literally, it wasn't a turn of phrase. And I found that in my life, when I'm preparing to share something with you people, a class, I find that I internalize it so profoundly, I start to recognize things I never saw in my life. It's absolutely, so I really have to thank you for that, giving me that opportunity. And then there's one last thing I'd like to mention, just on that, what I just said. You know, if you ever walk into a yeshiva, a traditional yeshiva, whether it's in Australia or in Israel, what is the first thing you're struck by?
People studying together.
Noise. The noise of the learning is amazing. Everyone here should step into the Yeshiva Gedola, the rabbinical, well, it's not the rabbinical college, but the high yeshiva here in of Alexandra Avenue. Yes, just to poke their face in and hear the noise. It's deafening. They're talking at the top of their lungs in terms of the learning. You'd even think that they're ready to hit each other in order. It's not. And here's the secret. The more that you extend yourself in terms of the learning, the more and more profoundly deeper you take it in. When you enunciate something, you're stretching your neshama further out than when you're thinking something. When you're raising your voice, you're using more energy. That means you're drawing from a deeper source within. You're stretching your neshama further out. And therefore, the reciprocation takes place. You internalize it much more. And that's why talking the learning is such an important feature historically in our tradition. So here I am doing all the talking, and therefore I'm hoping I'm picking something up along the way. Anyway, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.